Yat everyone. My name is Demetrius Johnson, and I'm a LANDBACK organizer with Indian Collective. For joining us today for this live panel on Demilitarization is Decolonization. This live is accompanied by Indian Collective's position paper that released today also, titled Demilitarization is Decolonization. And that position paper is available on Indian Collective's website, indiancollective.org, as well as visiting our social medias on Facebook and Instagram at Indian Collective. So today is Veterans Day in the so-called United States, and this means different things for different people. For most, it means honoring those that have served in the United States military. And for Krystal and Wendy, who are on the panel, I know that also means like going out to get your free food, get your free meal, get your free breakfast on, and just taking advantage of that, which you should. But in this conversation, we want to talk more about what that means, you know, what militarization means and demilitarization means for Indigenous people. The United States military and Indigenous people have a long and violent relationship with each other. Most of all of it perpetuated by the United States, and it hasn't ended to this day. And so most of our conversation will be unpacking that history, but what it also means to be anti-militarist as Indigenous people. And it is a privilege to hear and be in conversation with our Native veterans on this day for what that means. So today I'll introduce very briefly, and they'll introduce themselves, our speakers, our panelists. So we have Krystal Tubels, Director of Indian Collective's LANDBACK campaign. We have Hermes Bettelyoun, an organizer with Indian Collective's Racial Equity campaign. Danny Grassroof, COO of Cheyenne River Grassroots Collective. And Wendy Barranco, a community organizer who partners with Indian Collective and About Face. So I'll turn it over to our speakers to introduce themselves, their name, their nations, their pronouns, the titles, the branch of service, and also talking about a little bit of their experience serving within the U.S. military. So I'll I guess Krystal, since I introduced you first, we can go with you.
Okay. Apiveshev relatives, Mene wo statna nehav. My name's Krystal Tubels. I'm Oglala Lakota, Northern Cheyenne. I'm calling in from Northern Cheyenne territories. I go by the pronoun she, her, and I'm the director of the LANDBACK campaign, as Demetrius said. And, you know, I served in the U.S. Army for, I think, 8 years. As I get older these days, these numbers keep changing. I feel like it's like 6, 8, 10, I don't know. But anyways, I wasted a lot of time in my life, basically. But I served in the Army. I enlisted when I was really young. And, you know, a little bit about my military service was, it's a really complicated identity. And I think, like, you know, as I'm sharing, I'm thinking about conversations I've had with like Hermus and Danny and Wendy and many other Native and Indigenous veterans about the internal conflict that we experience of both being proud warriors that come from proud warrior cultures and being able to serve in that way, you know, in the ways that we think, right? We're embodying that, but also feeling shame for having participated in the U.S. empire, for having been used and exploited as a tool for U.S. imperialism. And it was a really, you know, long journey of trying to come to some sort of reconciliation with those pieces of myself, but those parts of my identity as a Native woman, as an Oglala woman, a Cheyenne woman, and also as a sergeant and as a veteran, as a U.S. soldier, right? And it was a long journey, but I think that I will say, you know, it has taken a lot of healing on my part and a lot of very intentional things to really come to a place where I feel like Native and Indigenous veterans are actually part of the key towards moving us towards a future that creates a just and equitable world for all people, and that they are the people who, if we can politicize and mobilize and be able to learn how to translate our skill sets to truly serve our people in our community right now, that we can actually change the landscape. We can change the conditions that we're living in. We can actually create this world that we envision. And I think that Native veterans, Indigenous veterans can be on the front lines of that kind of change for this world. And it took a long time to get there. And you know, I'm sure we'll dive in a little bit more, but that's just a little bit about, you know, my service and how it's kind of impacted me and how I carry it moving forward. Check.
Thank you for that, Krystal. We'll go on to Hermus.
Bettelyoun. My name is Bettelyoun. I'm from the Oglala Lakota tribe here in our homelands. But I served some time in the United States Marine Corps. It's really an honor because all through time our people have been warriors. I have family fighting all the way from World War I to current day, and also have aunties and uncles who served in different branches in the military. But it was a lot of it was forced, you know. They were drafted, and some of it was like the World War I veterans. Those ones, they fought before they were even considered citizens in the so-called United States. But yet we still fought, and we still stood for the country, you know. And it's kind of hurts in a way, but on the other side, I'm proud of where my family, you know, stood and standing for the people, not for the government. Check.
Thanks, Hermes. Danny?
My name is Danny Grassroof. I'm from Lower South Dakota. I'm second generation in the military. I was in the Army National Guard out of North Dakota as a military police. And to touch base about what Krystal was saying, you know, like the opportunities that come and go, thinking that was a getaway to getting off the reservation. You know, we're taught that the reservation isn't good for our people, and which is still like a man camp today. It's modern day warfare on these reservations in the U.S. It's just like a big thing, and it's very complicated, and it's like very emotional for me at times to talk about the understanding of what they did to our people, the history of the Indigenous people and the U.S. military. Even whenever our grandparents, our great grandparents served, and they weren't even civilians yet, they didn't get the freedom of religion was in 1978, and we still, you know, served in the U.S. military, knowing that we couldn't practice our spirituality. It's like very hard and touchy to really grasp being an Indigenous veteran of a big corporation that's oppressed our people. And one of the big things, this is very shocking, one of the big things that basic training that was asked was if I knew who Leonard Peltier was. And my response was, I'm Lakota. And they were just like, you know, that's really messed up of what they did to him. So I kind of had this uncomfortable feeling at the time, and the conversation went on. And finally, he asked the question after that conversation had happened, and he was like, "How do you feel about being Indian and enlisting in a military that has a bad history, bad reputation with your people?" And honestly, I just didn't know how to answer that. I kind of ignored that question, and I just went about our daily duties, and it made me really think after that. And even today's Veterans Day, it's just like one thing like I really don't like to talk about is being a veteran, having to serve in the U.S. military. It's like very complicated because the work that I do, there's a lot of military presence and a lot of actions, the groundwork with protecting the environment, defending the Lakota way of life. There's a lot of military presence. There's a lot of police presence. So it's very kind of like frustrating to be proud of serving, but also having that pride of being who I am, being Lakota. So it's like very complicated in ways with that aspect.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Danny. And then last but not least, Wendy.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me here. I think I'm on mute or not. Can y'all hear me? Cool. Thank you. Buenas tardes. My name is Wendy Barranco. My pronouns are she, her, ella. I am a combat veteran of the United States Army. I was socioeconomically drafted at 17, and I came out when I was 20. I was a combat medic, and I was in the occupation of Iraq, a sovereign nation of Iraq. I migrated from Mexico. I'm an indigenous woman, otherwise known as mestiza. And yeah, like many folks have already here highlighted, it is a complicated history, and it is something that has to be reckoned with. And I hope that we can get into some of the nuances and dynamics of what it means to reconcile what one has done for empire and then change that into service after being in the service, if you will. And I also want to take the opportunity to like push back on this concept of service, right? When we think of service, I think inherently we think like something noble, something worthwhile, right? And I think as my experience has shown, as I have found out, that's very much not the case. I'm more proud of the things that I'm doing now in my community, in supporting our collective liberation than I am for what I did when I was actually wearing a uniform. So I'll stop there and check.
Thank you all so much. And just hearing from all of you, I'm kind of going a little bit off of what we planned, but all of you brought up something I think is very important to talk about. And it's like this shame, or like this, like you're not proud of serving the US empire, the serving the US military. So I know like there's a lot of people listening right now, a lot of veterans, and a lot of young people too. But I think this is like a perfect opportunity, since you all brought it up, of talking about, I guess, like diving more into like why you feel that shame. And like, if I know all of you enlisted at a young age, so like if you could talk to your younger self and like, I guess, like educate them and tell them like why, like, why you shouldn't serve in the US military, or like why you shouldn't like give that power to the US military. And I'll open it up to anyone that wants to speak first.
I can jump in. So I think it's important to understand the socioeconomic factors that lead to us wanting to go into the military, right? And so one of those things for me was not having resources growing up in the inner city of LA and not having access to a free higher education. And so I think one of the first and foremost things that does need to be highlighted when we talk about the military and why a lot of people of color, particularly Native people, Indigenous people, go into the service, It's because we have very little resources, right? Because it's by design, and it's economically engineered that way. It's socially engineered that way. And so I like to call it a socioeconomic draft, right? And so it's very known, it's very well known that the military preys on the poor class, right? It preys on people of color, it preys on Native people. We know that Native people serve at exponential rates higher than anybody else in the military. And so that's first and foremost, right? We also have to understand that this country, we are steeped in violence and we are steeped in white supremacy, and that lives in our lives every single day, right? And so when we look at our federal budget, when we look at our national budget and where our monies goes and our resources go, that is not just a financial document, it's a moral document, it's an ethical document. And when the majority of those monies goes to life-taking programs, life-taking measures, bombs, right, not houses, bombs, not healthcare, right? We're talking about a country that values more violence, values more the taking of life than the affirming and the sustaining of life, right? Which now, right, I understand that that goes against who I am as a person ethically, who I am as a person morally, right? But back then, when I was 17, I very much thought that I was on the right side, right? That I was doing the right thing. And so as I went through my evolution, I came to realize, like, yo, like, are we the baddies? And we are the baddies, right? So I'll stop right there.
Yeah, I can jump in here. For me, I think it's about really understanding history. It's about understanding where we come from and in the formation of the U.S. military in itself, right? And so I think that this is stuff that young people need to know when they are thinking about that. And to be brutally honest, like, this is really complicated. Like, I have young people who I love and care about in my life who are currently preparing to enlist. And I can't in good conscience currently talk them out of it because I have no alternative for them. I have no way that I can keep them from alcoholism in a slow death that way, or sometimes from suicide, or from the school to prison pipeline. And I don't have an alternative for that right now. I can't give them that. And so who am I to take that choice from them to find something that is one of the very few things that our communities have to actually move them forward? And that is, it's really disheartening, and it's really sad to acknowledge that and to accept that that is the state that our communities are in. In addition to that, I will say, like I said, like, it's important that we know the history. It's important that we know that, all of this started, everything that we are experiencing in our communities, the high suicide rates, the oppression, the racism, the sexual assaults, the violence, the addictions, like, all of those things, they have roots. They have an origin, and that goes all the way back to the doctrine of discovery. That goes back to when these lands were claimed on behalf of a monarch because there were no Christians here, right? And that opened the door for settler colonization, for colonialism to come in and to basically build a nation over the top of nations, plural, that already existed here since time immemorial. We were already fully thriving economies and societies and communities. And the US military was the one who enforced that. They enforced the removal when we started to resist. Because make no mistake, we have been resisting since the first settlers have touched foot on our lands. We have been resisting since then. We have been just simply trying to be who we are as people. And the US military was a part of that. They came in and forcefully removed us. And when we wouldn't go, and when we resisted, because that's what we do, and when we tried to protect our lands and our territories and our peoples, because that's what we do, then they massacred us. And they didn't just do it. They didn't just do it in, like, different, like, summer months and things like that. They came at us in the winter months. So currently in this season that we are in, this is a season when we are slowed down. We're gathered together in larger groups, and where we're together and we're in one spot. We're not migrating the way that we do in the summer and moving in the summer. And so we're more at risk and we're more vulnerable. And they attacked us during these months. And we can go through hundreds and hundreds of names of massacres and incidences that happened during these months. You know, from now until January, February timeframe, there's hundreds of massacres that have happened that we still remember to this day. And it was the US military that did that. Like, make no mistake about that. And I think that when that didn't work, because we are resilient people and we come from strong warrior cultures. So when they couldn't eradicate us by massacres, then what they did was deploy several different tactics, right? They introduced alcohol. So when we were put on reservations and they stripped our men and our people of their traditional roles, they introduced alcohol to us. And so rather than hunting and going out and protecting and following the buffalo migration patterns and stuff like that, our alcohol was introduced. And so our high rates of alcoholism go back to the military, because it was the military outposts that gave those to us, right? Or even boarding schools. It was a major that actually created the first boarding school, the first boarding school that was away from our reservation, right? Carlisle Indian Boarding School, that used a military basic training model to take our children and run them through that and indoctrinate them and ultimately assimilate them, which ultimately leads to genocidal practices, right? And as we know, across so-called Canada and so-called US right now, mass graves are being found of those children that were subject to both church and to the military structures that they were introduced to, right? And that had the most, what I would say is the most deadly impact on our people. That's all military. That all comes directly from the US military. Those are all direct impacts on our community that we experience today that still impact us, that we still carry the trauma in us from those things that happened. And that wasn't that long ago. You know, we're talking like our grandparents that went through those things and that were subject to militarized boarding schools, right? And so I'll end with that just to say that I think it's important not only for our youth to understand that, and I wish I had known more of those things. I always knew about the massacres. I always knew about the stories from our communities, but I never connected it with service today. And it's, you know, we're taught and conditioned in our education system, which is colonial, to forget that and to remove ourselves from this past, or to even pretend that it didn't exist, or it happened so long ago that it's not applicable today. None of that is true. Like, the impacts of the US military and what they did as part of the colonial process still impacts us to this day. And by us continuing to serve, we're just serving that, and we're perpetuating that sort of violence on other Indigenous peoples globally, what happened to our people. And I think it's important for our young people to know that. It's important for all of our people to know that. It's important for other Native veterans and Indigenous veterans to know that history, and to know that what we experience today has roots, and it is with the US military. Check.
Thank you so much for that, Krystal. And I think it just totally flows into this next question about, you know, in our position paper, we talk about being like anti-militarist and Indian Collective, like adopting this stance on like kind of being like anti-militarist. But, you know, like that word holds like a lot of like contention. When someone says like they're anti-militarist, people have like this knee-jerk reaction of thinking that, oh, like you hate veterans, or like you hate your relatives that have served. And it's understandable to I mean, that word is just like very contentious. But in our paper, we outline like that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about exactly what you just talked about, Krystal, like that history. But I know there's more to that. So to everyone here, when we say anti-militarist, can you can you talk about what that means for you?
All right, y'all. All of our silences. D, you might have to start calling on us.
Oh, no,
we're
no
all
problem.
we're all out here. We're all out here in a classroom, waiting
It'd
for the
be like
teacher to
that.
call on us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Go ahead.
oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, around so what it means for me to be anti-militarist. Like I think, that's a loaded question. But basically I believe in a world where we don't have a US military. And like I know and realize that that is a really scary thing to say for a lot of folks. And I acknowledge that. And I'm definitely open to that conversation. But I will say that I do believe in that because the US military exists not to keep us safe. Like, that's the honest truth. If we want to look at that, like, who are we keeping ourselves safe from when we are the greatest military and political power in the world, and our military budget alone is greater than, it's still twice that of the next 10 countries' budgets combined. So who is it that we're in fear of, right? Like, that's a reality. The other thing is that the US military is in the business of creating terrorism. We do that. We create the circumstances that we're dealing with right now. So if this institution didn't exist anymore, there probably wouldn't be the perpetuation of these things that we're seeing, right? And they are in the business of violence. The US military, and those of us that have enlisted and have been through that, we know we were trained to be part of a killing machine. That's what we were trained to do, is to take lives. And that is a fact. And so I think it's important to know that, like, when we say that we're anti-militarist, those are the things that we're saying we're against, not against the individuals, right? Like, I am not against veterans. I am not against individuals who are in these situations where this may be the only route forward, right? And this may be the one path where they can see the world, or the one path where they feel like they can get a secondary education or a college education. It may be the only opportunity for like financial stability. It may be the only opportunity for all of these things, right? That they wave in front of us. And I fell into it. Like, they got me with serve your country. And I believed that because I was raised to serve my people. And I was taught those things. And so they got me. And I believe that this is the way I can help my people. This is how I protect my homelands. This is how I serve, right? And they get you on those things. But they don't tell you what you're actually doing. They don't they don't tell you the full things that, like, oh, now you're gonna invade a whole other indigenous country and indigenous lands so that way we can remove them to get access to their oil, or to get access to their resources. So when I say I'm anti-militarist, I'm against those things. I'm against people profiting off of indigenous loss of land and loss of lives. I'm against people profiting off of us staying at war constantly, all the time. And so, yeah, I would just end with that. It's like I'm against those things. I'm against these pieces, right? And I'm not against individuals. I'm not against veterans who have served and who have sacrificed and given lives, right? Like, we're not against that. And we honor that because we've all had to make hard choices in our lives. We're all moving on this the best way that we can, and we honor that, right? But also, as a Native woman, as an Indigenous woman, as an Oglala woman, as a Northern Cheyenne woman, it is my moral duty to make sure that what happened to my people at the hands of the US military does not happen to other Indigenous peoples in other lands. And that at least I am not a part of that anymore. And I take that to heart. That's part of my responsibility, is I'm here committed to a just and equitable world for all people. And that's what it means. For me to do that, it means I'm anti-militarist. Check.
Yes, I'll go next. Oh.
Go ahead.
Okay. All right. So being anti-militarism is, for me, it's like bringing back my identity of who I am, who my ancestors were. It's not like what Krystal mentioned before. It's not like dogging on who served. It's more or less the identity of who I am, because that was stripped away from my grandparents. And a lot of people don't get that that's just 2 generations away. That's still modern day. That's still happening. It's just recent, so people can't say get over it, move on, because that's still happening. There's a lot of boarding schools up and running still. A lot of Catholic boarding schools here in our region. I know St. Joe's is one of them in South Dakota that still take only Indigenous children and assimilate them into a society that disrupts the Lakota way of life. So for me, saying I'm anti-militarism, it's just more of like bringing back our identity of who we are. It's re-educating our younger folks. The question that was asked before, it's re-educating them of who we are and what it means to be a warrior. At Kichita, there's no word for being a warrior like starting war. It's more of defending your way of life. It's defending our territory. It's defending, our medicines, our sacred sites. It's defending our families. It's defending the environment. All those things, and then re-educating the society of like the training that we went through. I know there was a comment about self-defense. Those are the things we can teach our own communities. And here on the Cheyenne River, there was actually 2 self-defense classes here, and they were hosted in the Veterans Center here. So like those kinds of classes, what it means to be a warrior and bringing back those warrior societies, those resources that we have to bring back our way of life and who we are. That's our identity, and it was taken from, like my grandparents. Like I said, I'm second generation in the military, and it's like I'm proud of my dad serving and everything. Like I'm not proud that I served, but I will take the training I have to re-educate the Lakota way of life and how we can adjust the factors of being oppressed by a big society that says we're going to take you from being off the streets. We're going to take you and we're going to give you a good life. But what we did to you, you're going to have to do to other people across seas. Like that's just like the tough, the honestly, our truth. And it kind of hurts knowing that I see a lot of young people joining and swearing in, and I'm just like, how do I talk them out of it? But just like had Krystal mentioned before, you have to have the resources. You have to have a backup plan for them not to enlist, because they do prowl on us a lot, especially in Indian territory, because we're one of the poorest communities in the U.S. So like it's a really tough thing to like try to take back your identity when you don't know where to start. Like I grew up, a Catholic, and just whenever I was 18, that's whenever I started learning about my culture. And it was a really emotional eye opener for me in a journey to, call back who I am, call back my spirit. And for that, I'm thankful for About Face for bringing that to me. I'm thankful for Krystal coming to Cheyenne River and allowing that space to happen, that healing to start. And I would not know who I am if it wasn't for them standing up, other veterans standing up against the military-industrial complex of who I am. I have to thank them, because I wouldn't know. I would still be lost. I would still trying to go back because of my lifestyle today. Not having a job, limited resources, limited funds. It's very tough. And one of those that's sticking back in my mind is re-enlisting, because that's an easy getaway. But I definitely, remind myself that that's not how I want to live, because the movement that we do today, protecting our environment, protecting our way of life, it's in the Lakota protocol to defend that. And whenever the military wants to come in and recruit, it's up to us to defend our young ones from enlisting. But it's still their choice. We're all about, you have to have your own journey. This is not your journey is different from mine. And if you make that choice to join, that's you. The only thing I can do is re-educate the system that oppressed us, also pushing in our own spirituality, our own way of life. But with that, I'll check.
I'll say I stand with a lot of the veterans. Every one of us will respect each other as we respect each other as veterans, as people who stood for others who couldn't fight, not for this government. As going back all the way to our ancestors, we had Kichita and Tokalas, all those warrior societies that stood up for the people who couldn't fight. they were always there. But when it comes to new age, I know the question was, what would you say to our younger self? That goes back to, in many situations like mine, the military was the only way out. It was my way out of staying out of the prison system. It was my way out of being criminalized every day for just walking down the street, being lajote, you know. And I have a big mouth. I am not afraid to stand up and talk to anybody, no matter who it is or where you stand, you know. I'll tell you what I think. And for that, I get a lot of pushback from like law enforcement and people who hold office in government places, you know. When you speak your mind, they automatically think that they have some sort of power over you, and nobody has the right to own anybody. And our it just goes right back into the government. It's their colonized way of thinking. The government thinks that they own each and every one of us. And as veterans, and when we did serve in their military, you know, they had us, they broke us down and put in our mind that, you know, we're here for the government. When in actuality, we're here because we didn't want to be in that the railroad from school to prison system. And it's sad to say, but a lot of times that's the only way out. That's the only way off the reservation. For example, you come to Rapid City, and these are our homelands here. The Black Hills are the homelands to our people. And the government acknowledged that through the treaties they signed, you know. And a good example is the mayor of this city, who sits in a government office, telling our people to go back to the reservation, go back to the POW camps that they put us on. And people they really try to avoid those kind of conversations. They're hard conversations, but they avoid them because they know the truth is, you know, you can never hold the truth back. Those POW camps, like I come from number 344, and that's what I tell people. And when you introduce yourself that way, you get a shocking moment like, wow, you know, they don't want to acknowledge that there are POW camps here in the middle of the so-called United States. But I respect all veterans, white, Black, Mexican. I even served with some Vietnamese. You know, they're the same way. They were oppressed by the U.S. government. They had their homelands taken from them. But yet, you know, they still stood with us. And it's their glorified way of saying, let me give you a better life. And I've yet to see a better life. The healthcare system for veterans is just a step up from IHS. You know, the housing system for veterans is a step up from the unhoused. And this government is, they put a blinder over a lot of people's eyes, and so that's their sugarcoating a way out, when actuality they're oppressing us even more by trying to control us. Check.
Would you like to answer on this, Wendy?
Yeah, so yes, I agree with most of all of what's been said here. I think it's important to differentiate between the individual and the system. Like, I don't fault the individual for joining, like I said, especially when we don't have, the alternatives. I just wish that somebody would have opened my eyes and let me know what the hell I was getting into, frankly. And that's something that I do a lot in like high schools, and I talk about like my experience, particularly as a woman, particularly as an Indigenous woman, as a Latina who is going to get, fetishization, exoticization, sexual harassment, rape, possibly murdered, right? And so I think that that's important to talk about when we say, like, what are the risks with it when we go in? In lieu of not having better alternatives, can we fault people for joining the service? No, I can't. But at the very least, the best that I can do is to talk openly and frankly about what they're going to be up against. And so to your question about like what is demilitarization for me is really about survival, right? And I want to connect it to like the global struggle, because I'm sure y'all have noticed we're in a very serious climate crisis here. And so part of the key to stopping that is stopping the US military and abolishing the US military. Why? The US military is the #1 single largest polluter in the world. Let's just sit with that for a second. Literally, the single largest polluter in the world. So stopping that really is the key to our collective survival and hopefully our collective liberation. And so our local struggles are important and they're valid, and that should also go hand in hand with the effects that militarism has globally, right? I can speak from my experience. Like, my family left and migrated here to the so-called United States, looking for better opportunities. I'm of the opinion that Mexico is a colony of the United States, right? They may not have troops, but financially, right, particularly with NAFTA, we function, right? All those resources, all the things are being pillaged from Mexico, from indigenous lands. And so for me, that's intimately tied to an agenda of abolishing borders, right? Abolishing those lines on the earth, on our lands, who are waging violence against people, right? So to me, it's no longer about open borders, it's about abolishing borders. That to me is the liberation of all of us. And so it's connecting and tying that to like a global struggle. And really, it boils down to survival, not just mine, not just yours, but worldwide. When we're talking about demilitarization, is decolonization, is survival, is literal collective survival, right? And I don't have to hopefully tell y'all folks, but like indigenous peoples are the stewards of biodiversity, right? Of our precious, most awesomest resources on this earth, right? And so protecting that, being good stewards of that, being in good relationship with folks, is going to be crucial to our survival. And I really desperately need more people to understand that, right? And so that's how I'm able to differentiate between like the individual and the systems, right? I'm not mad at individual folks. We do need a collective like deepening of our analysis as veterans, right? Anti-imperialist veterans, period. At the same time, like, I'm pissed off as hell, at the systems, not at the individual who's being pushed into that direction, into those avenues, because frankly, there's not a ton out here, right, that is life affirming. Check.
Holy moly, what are those? I'm getting pumped. And I think, all of you touched on this question I'm about to ask. But when we say like we're anti-militarist, it's not just that we're against something. And as like all of us are organizers, and it would be like remiss, or like it would be I don't know, it would be like a disservice to just say like we're just complaining about these things, because that's not what organizers do. Organizers help build and connect and move beyond things. So that is what this question is um, we're not just against the military, but we have to be for something. We have to be building towards something. And so for all of you, like, what does that look like? What does it look like to look beyond the military in our communities? And what are we for? And I'll open it up to anyone.
I can start because I've spent a lot of time thinking about this. I think because, you know, like I can't lie and say that I did not benefit from service, because I did. You know, when I enlisted, I was really young, and I was getting out of like a 2-year abusive relationship, you know, where I was experiencing violence, and I was lost, and I needed some sort of structure. I needed some sort of like discipline, and I needed some sort of like financial security and stability. And I got all of that. I received that, you know, and that was a very formative time in my life where it taught me discipline, it taught me structure, it taught me all these things. And I had these experiences, right? I gained this knowledge. Each one of us that's on this panel here today, we have had thousands and thousands of dollars of training invested in us. And we benefit from that. I benefit from that. And so I'm not out here saying that like we don't benefit from those things, right? And I'm not saying that those things aren't things that have actually helped in my life, and that I don't actually utilize right now to be in the position that I'm in, to be able to run campaigns, to organize, to serve my people in a true way, right? They are all things I use and tap into right now in this moment for these things, right? And so that's not what we're saying. And I think that, you know, in terms of what I envision for the future, like I believe that we are fully capable of protecting our communities and gaining the skills and the knowledge and the experience to become and to be warriors in our own communities, whatever that may look like, without the US military. I believe that's possible. I think it's very possible. I think that can look many different ways. It can look like Danny out on the front lines, preventing pipelines from going through our territories and polluting our water, and from extracting and exploiting the land. You know, it can look like Hermus, who interacts and confronts Rapid City Police Department on a daily basis, just to make sure that our people are safe and they're not being harassed, and that they're not being assaulted, and that they're not being treated poorly on our own lands, right? Like it looks like Wendy and I, who organize on national levels and international levels, and who are in these communities, and that are actually supporting and making connections and building relationships and networks and connecting the dots between our struggles to make sure that we are fighting for a world that is inhabitable and that is just for all people. You know, that looks many different ways. And I don't think that we have to have military skills to do that, or at least we don't have to gain those skills specifically from the US military to do that, right? I think that what we need to be doing is we need to be investing back into our own warrior societies. And that looks different, right? When we're talking about in cities, in these areas, who are also fighting for abolition, and to actually, like, you know, the same thing for police, right? Like removing the police state and abolishing the police state, and then abolishing the military. The answers are already out there. Communities are already moving in this direction. They are already creating the safety that they need to be able to move forward. They're already creating those things for themselves. So we're not talking about anything that's just like brand new or revolutionary or just like impossible, because the solutions are already happening. Camp Mini Luzahan, one of Indian Collective's projects, who Hermes was a major instrumental part of, was a place where we were able to actually create safety and wellness and wholeness for our houseless relatives that are in Rapid City, in a way that was like free of Rapid City Police Department, that was free of the city services that waste billions of dollars every year by not servicing our people, but they claim they are. But we were able to actually create a space that actually truly serves them without police and without that intervention there. So it's like these places are actually possible. These things, these solutions are actually possible. What does it look like? Say, maybe we have security companies. maybe that are based and rooted in our own values, in our traditional knowledge, in our ways of being in relationship with the land, in our ways of being in relationship with each other. What happens when we create those kind of like structures, in that we actually are able to become warriors in that, and we create our own warrior training that happens, right? So not basic training, not AIT, not those things, but our own. And we had those pre-colonization. Why can't we bring those back in a way that exists today, in today's society? Like, I think that's completely possible. And I try not to stay hung up on what I'm against. Although I'm like Hermus, I'm not afraid to say what I have to say though, and like fight what I have to fight. But I do spend a lot of time thinking about solutions. I think about how, okay, well, if I'm against this, then what are those solutions for my kids in my community, the ones that are thinking about enlistment? Can I build that future for them to not have to enlist? Can I build an alternative for our young men to become warriors? And to do that in a way that's in accordance with our traditional values, with our ceremonies, our teachings, our way of lives, all of those things, not the US military. And I think it's possible. And so I'll just stop with that. But I will say this in terms of like, you know, the duality that exists in terms of like being both in gratitude for the experience and the knowledge and the skills that I've gained in the military, and also knowing that something else is possible. But I forget who wrote this quote. Y'all can correct me, Nadia, or someone can drop it in the chat. But the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. Our service in the US military will never help us achieve sovereignty. And that's why we wrote the paper, the position paper. Demilitarization is decolonization. We have to start thinking about the solutions and the decolonial ways that we move forward without service in the US military. Check.
So without doing the military tactics and all that crazy mumble stuff, I agree with Krystal. Start going back to our traditional ways of creating those Tokala societies, creating Akichita, all those warrior societies that our people were before on our homelands, like we did at Camp Mini Luzaha, which was really crazy because it was really successful. And what made it successful was the roots to the ground, the roots to the land that our people, they felt the connection between what pumps through their veins into the earth. We're all related, and it was so perfect. But creating those societies again to give our young men things to stand up for the people, rather than turn to gangs, rather than to get on that railroad from the school to the prison system, and our kids face that even to this day. My little son, he's in first grade, and yesterday for Veterans Day, they stood up and they did a Pledge of Allegiance in the gym, and he refused to stand, and he refused to pledge allegiance to the flag that actually belongs to us. We defeated this country and took that flag, so it actually belongs to us. So all those people that, they stand and they pledge allegiance to our flag. We took that up at Greasy Grass. Anyhow, my son, he refused to stand. And when they asked him, he said, my dad's a veteran. He said, and he fought for the people. He didn't fight for the country. And that itself made me so proud. Even at his young age, he's already started. And hopefully we can get something like the Tokala Society and bring back our old societies to our people, so we don't need the government. We don't need that government on our land. what we need is for our ways to come back, for us to be who we were as a people. We need to come back together and stand together. And once we do that, then the demilitarization, they need people to carry out their orders. They need bodies to carry out their orders. But if we can provide an alternative for indigenous people so they don't have to be those bodies to carry out the orders of the government, then they're going to have to look elsewhere, or they're going to have their sons and their daughters join, which is a lot of cases, I think Wendy touched on it. Indigenous people have a high, there's a high rate of our people that are in the military. A lot of the military personnel are indigenous people. And so if we can bring back those societies and give our people a chance. Check.
I'd just like to bring up our education system, because I believe a lot of our young children and teenagers, they spend a lot of hours in the education system going to school. So I feel like part of that is a fight within the school system, re-educating our Lakota ways, our values, our protocols, and bringing back the SNAR knowledge, bringing back the language. Like the English language, they have specialists that work with kids that have a hard time, talking and speaking and stuff, and in the English way. I feel like one of the ways that we can bring back our language is a push to have not only have the like foreign languages in our schools, but bringing back indigenous language, First Nations languages. But we also have to remember that if we give these tools, if we educate the young ones, we have us as good mentors. We have to have that stability of talking to them in Lakota, because if they talk to us in Lakota and we respond in English, it's kind of redundant that we do those things. So it's really up to the community to bring back the school system, to bring back our way of life, to teach the STAR knowledge, to teach why we go in Anichaka, Anipi, sweat, why we do those things, why do we protect our medicines, why do we stand up against pipelines that want to contaminate our water, our sacred lands, our sacred sites. It's it's the LANDBACK campaigns, that who we are, that identity that we belong to the land don't belong to us. So it's understanding, going full circle in our spirituality, but allowing other indigenous folks that your spirituality matters as well. And we have to band together and stand up and fight against the US military that still oppresses our people in these ways. And I know we mentioned bringing back our societies that we had before, our warrior societies, our women warrior societies. It's also defending who we are and how we talk to our children and how we educate other nations who we are, holding that fire, that sacred fire that we live. It's how to take care of that spiritually, physically, and allowing that education and allowing that change, so that way when it's time for our youngers to reteach, that they can fluently speak our language to others that are breaking down the system in education. But it's like really hard too, because being assimilated, we're just like fighting against high school diplomas if you don't meet state standards. Even with Krystal, trying to take away the indigenous people's history out of textbooks, learning that in school. It's those types of things that we have to stand up for, and we really have to push for our children to be educated with our own knowledges, our own spiritualities, our own way of life. Because the Western society, it clearly doesn't work for indigenous folks. It never did, and I honestly don't think it ever will. It's bringing back the mental stability when people have a mental breakdown. It's going on the healing runs that we have. It's going on drawing. It's going off of just going out and being grounded out in the wilderness, grounding yourself. It's those types of things, those types of education that we have to bring back, as well as defending who we are. But in order to do that, we really have to look at the education system, where who's teaching our children? How are they teaching our children? It's really a really tough call to go into a school and say, give them a curriculum that's based on Indigenous curriculum, and say that they're getting a high school diploma because the state is against that. They want to teach this, like their history, but in reality, we have to take back our identity and who we are, and those are the steps that we have to take precaution and also be plan. And a shout out to Oglala Lakota College, because their mission is to rebuild the Lakota Nation through education, and their system is based off our spirituality, our way of life. So you have to take these classes; they're required of who we are, and knowing the history, the star knowledge, the land, the Lakota language, everything around that is based off of who we are. So shout out to them for establishing that. With that, I'd like to check.
Thank you all. Wendy, did you want to speak on this?
I think, yeah, I'll just keep it brief. I've spent a lot of time organizing against things, and so I appreciate this question about like, what are you for? I think it goes hand in hand. There's a lot of pushback from folks who say like, well, yeah, you're against these things, but like, what are you for? And so like, I think it's important, at least for me, to clarify in my experience that like, I thought I was joining for a certain thing, the life affirming and like a noble thing of like service and duty and country. But that turned out very much not to be the case. And I think it's important to highlight like what Krystal has talked about before, which is like this, a duty, a more noble cause tied to warrior societies, which is like in defense of the people, right? And which to me sounds like as life affirming ways of moving in the world, right? Which is more of an ethic, really, if you think about it. So that's where I'm moving to. That's where I've moved to and where I'm operating now from. I see my role as taking what I've learned in the military, deconstructing that, taking what is valuable and life affirming and applying that, and hopefully continuing to work to be in right relationship as someone who does not belong to these lands, who wants to continue to nurture relationships and establish good relationships with folks. But at the end of the day, what it means for me is like universal healthcare, free universal healthcare, education, like Danny has talked about, free higher education all the way around, housing as a human right for our unhoused relatives, right? And so when we look at those lenses of like life affirming campaigns, life affirming initiatives, then we start to understand why militarization is not in line with our ethic, right? As stewards of the land, as folks who are part of the land. And so, I circle it back always to like borders and how that's violence on the land and keeps us separate, right? And migration, right? Because of these climate crises, but also even before that, people were migrating, right? Seasonally. And that is a right, that is a natural right that people have, particularly from the global south. And so as this climate crisis gets worse, we also have to connect that the border is heavily militarized. Our communities are heavily militarized. We see a lot of equipment being handed down from the military to police for the purposes of militarizing our communities. And so an abolitionist framework is crucial, right, to everything that we're doing, both locally and on a global scale. Check.
Thank y'all so much. This was going to be the next question, but I'm not going to ask it because this whole conversation has been like how you would talk to like your relatives, how you would talk and explain these concepts to like grandma or to your auntie or to your little cousin. And I appreciate all of your answers. You touched on demilitarization. You talked. There was some topics on capitalism, but there's other hard topics too, like what it like international. I know we talked about it briefly, but the international framework of, the first frontier was here in the U.S., but now the U.S. military has expanded all over the globe. We're the number one military in the world with the international bases. So not only like occupying land here in the so-called U.S., but internationally too. But thank you all for your honesty and like being very direct and making it very digestible for our relatives listening now. But I also want to open it up to, again, talking about like those statistics, talking about like that history, and really like compounding it, making it like very solid. Like, like we're talking about all these things, but this goes way, way deeper. Like there's a reason why like we're upset. There's a reason why like we have to like talk about these things. So I guess this will be like my last question to all of y'all. But like, why now? Like, why do we have to talk about like demilitarization now? Like, what's the urgency? And like, why do we talk about demilitarization as like a part of the LANDBACK campaign? But I'll open it up to you all, and I'm excited for this conversation.
Here we are again. I'll go. This is a really good question, just because, Wendy and myself and our friend Ksenia, who's also a veteran, like we've been having these conversations amongst each other for a while, and we just had a conversation with my mom actually, and like, it's been a long road. Like my grandpa, my mom's dad, was a veteran, and he served during Vietnam, and he went through a lot, and he didn't make it out. He made it home, but he didn't make it home the same, and he didn't, I don't think, ever really leave the war, and at least the war never left him. And so it's been interesting, like as me being the granddaughter, of coming from a proud family, that loved him and support him and honor him. And also, all of our other veterans in our community too, like being raised in that. It's been interesting, like me saying that I'm anti-militarist. It's been something that's been like hard, in that it's a hard thing, because I'm sure my parents and my siblings and people around me, they want to thank me for my service. They want to do those things and acknowledge me. And it's hard, because I don't want to be acknowledged for that. Like, I want to be acknowledged for the things I'm doing now, for our fight now to protect and to reclaim our land, for the youth organizing that I do, for the engagement and the relationships that I'm building out globally to be able to support other Indigenous peoples. And so it's been a hard thing. And I think part of the conversation that we've been having is around like the way that we say this, like saying I'm anti-militarist is like, it probably feels aggressive. It probably feels like pointed and things like that. But it's really not, y'all. Like, one thing that my dad says is that, like when the house is on fire, like you don't sit and have a conversation about it. Like you just get out, you just do what you have to do. And y'all, our house is on fire. Like literally, California, how long did that burn? The Amazon, how long did that burn? These mega fires that are happening, how long? Like, we are literally on fire. Like, our Mother Earth, the giver of all life, our life source, is on fire. And that's the urgency, is if we continue to go at the rate that we are going, we will not have inhabitable Earth going forward. Like my nephew and our children and our children's children will not have that future. They won't have an Earth to live on, because we are just like on this trajectory of being self-destructive right now, because we want to thank a veteran, because we want to continue to uplift violence in extraction and the removal of indigenous peoples from their lands to get access to their resources. And I'm not okay with that. And so for me, that's the urgency, is like I'm out here, you know, fighting climate and like trying to work towards climate justice and fight back and you know, mitigate climate change and to prevent our earth from continuing to be exploited and to reclaim our relationship to the land. Like simply just being able to be on our land and just have access to clean drinking water, or just have access to housing, or just have access to like hunt, or to just gather our medicines and our berries and the plants that we know to like heal ourselves. And that's all we're trying to do. And we can't do that if this so-called country keeps investing over half of the discretionary budget into war, into violence, into death. And that's where our values are. What we spend money on is a direct reflection of our values. And right now, as a so-called country, we value violence. We value war. We do not value universal health care, universal housing, universal education, all of the things that our communities desperately, desperately need right now, especially in the time of a global pandemic. And so that is the urgency. The urgency is the fact that we keep saying as a so-called country that there's no monies for these things, these solutions that people have presented time and time again, but there's plenty of money. There's plenty of money out there. Because every single time we want to send more money to Israel, somehow we find trillions of dollars. Somewhere we've been able to like find that money and make it happen, but we can't find money for universal health care. We can't find money to forgive student loans and get our people out of debt, crippling debt. Like, no, I refuse to accept those things. And that is the urgency. That's why it's now. And at the heart of it, as I spoke to earlier, we're in the LANDBACK campaign, like we're trying to reclaim lands. And we know that everything we are experiencing has roots. And I mentioned that earlier. Those roots are when we were forced to remove from our lands. And that was at the hands of the US military. So therefore, this conversation has to live within the LANDBACK campaign and live within our work that we do, because they are also an enforcer in preventing us from being on our lands. I mean, you want to look at like the statistics, you look at the names, like look at the names of our reservations for all the forts, right? Fort Hall, Fort Berthold, Fort Defiance, like all of these reservations in these towns and these communities are named after the military installations, not our own names, not the names that we know in our languages, in our communities, but the names that the US military put on those locations. And do you know why those locations are there? They are there very specifically because they were key military positions to be able to come out and try to squash indigenous resistance. They're strategic. Where military installations exist, it's a strategic thing, and it's in direct response to indigenous resistance. Where the supply routes, the old supply routes and the army routes, those are now our highways that cut right through a lot of our reservations, where semis can bulldoze through and kill our people, kidnap our women, kill our animals, and destroy our infrastructure. All of those things are existing because of the military. Even the name of equipment and missions, I mean, they're named after our peoples. There was a mission for Osama bin Laden. When they went in, they called it Geronimo. Like, how degrading is that? All of the equipment, the helicopters, everything, like the Apache, the Cherokee, all of these things are named after us, supposedly in honor. But none of that was done in honor. All of that was done in attempted genocide. And so it's important to remember those things. And I think all of that stuff leads me to the urgency of like, why do we continue to uphold this and to uplift this, knowing that, like what Wendy mentioned earlier, that the US military is the largest single polluter in the world. And she had to sit with that. Why do we continue to allow that? Why does every major climate justice movement and organization not say anything about militarization and about militarism? You cannot fight climate justice and say that that's what you're doing if you are not also calling out militarization. And that is just a fact. And so I think like that is the urgency that we're dealing with right now, is like our house is on fire, literally. Our people are dying, and we are valuing death and violence and war over people. And that's not okay with me. And that's not okay for us to move into the future that way. And we may not have a future with that. And so for me, that is why it has to live within the LANDBACK campaign. That is why we have to have urgency behind what we're having conversations about right now in these moments. Check.
I would just like to say, the conversation now is because the US military disrupts peace. It disrupts peace for a lot of people, not just here on Turtle Island, not just here in the US, it's all over the world. And what we're lacking is, what we're really lacking is the healing and the connection between other tribes and other nations across seas, that healing that we are brought forth together naturally, being peaceful people. I know there was mention about being stewards of this land, but that's what we are. And the US military, they show up whenever we want to protest peacefully. We have ceremonies, we have ceremonial camps, prayer camps, and you have the military police National Guard out of Bismarck come in and disrupt our ceremonies, which is an amendment, freedom of religion. And they're disrupting the Constitution. Like, who upholds the Constitution? It should be the soldier, the veterans. They know that the treaties are the supreme law of the land, and why are they not being honored today? It's reminding folks that Indigenous people have this way of life that's been disrupted. And I know a lot of people are out there lost trying to find their own religion, but here in our territory, we have that, and it brings peace. It works for us. We don't go around oppressing other nations. We don't go around killing people for their resources. We don't bully anybody, but the US military does. And knowing, that backlash, being a Native veteran, it's just frustrating to talk about. But I'm glad that we went through that so we can educate others so they don't have to go through that. It's just bringing that healing back, that balance that the US military caused, that unbalancedness. It's bringing back the balance to our societies, our way of life. And it's just leaving, it sounds so cliche about living in peace and harmony, but that's what we need. And that comes with healing. That comes with dismantling the US military, dismantling capitalism, dismantling big corporations that have eminent domain, that go through our Indigenous territories, our circuit sites, that bring us the healing that we need to heal people. It's recognizing our women that bring life. It's bringing back that feminism leadership. It's allowing that space to happen, bringing back that balance. So it's all those things. So that why bring up the conversation now? It's because it's needed, and our people need healing. And we need healing from the US government. We need healing from the churches. We need our kids back home. We need them to survey the boarding schools, the old boarding schools. We need them surveyed so that way we can heal. And it's foretold, once the people that carry the Chinupa, that carry the way of life, when they heal, we can heal the world. And that's what we need. We need that healing for everyone so we can bring that balance back. Like Krystal mentioned before, the earth is on fire. Why? Because people want to build infrastructures that destroy our land. People want to bring in CO2 pipelines and thinking that they're doing, what's that called? Carbon offset. But literally, they want to destroy us from the inside out, building these pipelines and storing them underground. It's those types of things that we stand for, that I stand for. And it's not because I'm an activist. It's not because I'm a land defender. It's not because I'm a water protector. It's because I'm a Lakota, because it's in my protocol to defend our way of life, to defend that peace. It's acknowledging other people's spirituality. That's why the conversation needs to happen. With that, I'll check.
Wow. After those two, I don't know. It's going to be a tough. You guys are awesome. Fire me up. So, throughout time, the military has massacred our people. And I think demilitarizing the government and the government using that as their way to bully people in and out of their their territories and off their indigenous lands is more than enough reason for me. Like I heard Danny speak about, you know, veterans and the soldiers and the government upholding their constitution, and it's really sad because they wrote a constitution that they put their hand on a Bible and they raise their right hand and they swear with their life to uphold that constitution and every bit of it, which goes into including the treaties, which are the supreme law of the land. But the government, the judicial system and law enforcement, they claim all of that, right? They claim every bit of that constitution up until it comes to Article 6, you know. And when it comes to stuff that they only uphold the parts of that constitution that suits them in that time. If you take that military part away, the bullying part of the military, the government might be able to do some of that, might open their eyes and become human and realize that, you know, over time they have massacred people and they have stomped on children and women and have beaten our men. They have raped and murdered them and put fear into them and put us on these POW camps. And also it all comes down to, I mean, it's all tied together. Their religion, you know, that religion isn't ours. We didn't have a Bible. We didn't have a Jesus. We didn't have a I don't know what the Catholics call it, but they came into our territories and they came onto the reservations and they beat our grandmas and our grandpas, you know. And those boarding schools, the Catholic schools, have a huge thing to play in that, because my grandma, she spoke Lakota and she rarely spoke English, but she was beat by these white priests to speak this language that isn't even ours. And it's sad because the government condoned it. The government turned around and went back to Wounded Knee after more than 100 years, almost 100 years, you know, of massacring our people. Went back there and had another standoff because our people wouldn't back down, because of warrior spirit in our people. They call us wild Oglalas, but that warrior spirit in us will never die, you know. And demilitarizing, it's a tough conversation because people think that we're against our veterans. We're against people who fought for us, but we're not. We fought for our people. We didn't fight for the government. That's where I stand. Check.
I'll chime in with a little bit. That's beautiful, Hermes. Thank you for that. You know, to your question about how to talk with young folks, we should be following them. Like, they know what's going, we need to follow their leadership. Like, they are not fucking around, and I am here for that energy. Furthermore, to your question about like, how do we talk to people? You know, I just can't echo Krystal enough. Like, we are out of time. I'm angry, I am pissed, I do not have a future. Our children do not have a future. Why should I be mincing words? Why should I hold back? Furthermore, I think, it's also important to recognize that, like, we come from the belly of the beast. We experience that. We come from lived experience. And that's something that, I wish I could amplify Krystal for days, because she's talking and coming at from lived experience. I am talking coming from lived experience that lives in my body, right? That's not a degree. That's not some paper. I lived that, right? And so, like, there is a level of authority, of lived authority, right? Not granted to me from anybody. When I say, like, I've been through these things, right? And so I think there is a level of, of time that is wasted on folks that want to tiptoe and want to be coddled and want to be catered to around privilege, around respectability politics, around identity. Representation is not enough. So, like, just because somebody looks like you, just like because the VP looks like me, or somebody looks like me up in power, doesn't mean that that person represents my interests, right? And I'm also not going to cater to how someone wants to be spoken to, right? How has that worked out for us exactly? Not well. That's the short of it. That's too long, didn't read. And so I think it's important, right, that to the extent that conversation and the sharing of stories is hugely important, I also think that when people ask this question of, like, how do we get folks to move us, they're really trying to waste our time and appeal to folks that, like, the implication is that we need to cater to folks who are privileged, right, who are perhaps middle of the road, or who are white, right? They have enough of that. It's time to burst the bubble. It's time for action. The house is on fire. We need to do something radical. That is the time. This is the time. Now, yesterday, actually, right? So to your question about, like, how to talk to young folks, follow young folks. They know what's up, right? They're good. They're doing the thing. They're out in the streets right now, right? To the extent that, like, they should be mentoring us. That's something else that I would highly favor. But I think that there is something to be said about making folks uncomfortable, right? Particularly on the left, right? You will find your run-of-the-mill veteran all day. He is a white male bro. He will say all of the things. He will ascribe to nationalism and jingoism and patriotism and all the isms. But you're going to find few and far in between veterans who are going to be okay with questioning that nationalism and that patriotism, right? And so, like, it's not just enough to be a woman of color. It's not just enough to be an Indigenous woman, but you also have to have that analysis too, that deep analysis of coming correct, and also, like, with everybody, right, on a global scale and on a local scale. And so we're out of time. We're out of time. We've had enough conversations, right? And, I'm here all day for my people. I'm here all day for our people. And my job, as I see it, is to come and collect my Latinx folks, my Indigenous folks in the global South, from, stopping getting into CBP, going into the police, going into the military, all of that good stuff. And that needs to be partnered with praxis. That needs to be partnered with action, right? On the ground, everywhere, right? Don't forget, these people, these defense contractors, allegedly have addresses. They have home addresses. They have companies, right? And so I think that to your question, like, it's important. It's important to have these conversations, but it's incomplete without action. Check.
Thank y'all so much. I teared up quite a bit hearing all of your answers. But I quoted Krystal in her last speech. You cannot fight for climate justice if you can't call out the U.S. military, and I feel like that's totally just, like, relevant, not only for this conversation, but also just, like, the location I'm in. I'm calling in from Glasgow, Scotland, for the COP26 stuff, and I wish that you were all here, like calling this out, because I feel like during these whole conversations, it hasn't really been a point of focus. But we are going to close out. We will provide resources. Our position paper is actually another resource. There's so much citations and hyperlinks and a lot, like everything. There's a lot contained within that position paper, everything that we talked about. But we'll also be including more resources as well, posting them on our social medias. But I would also like to close out saying that it's also been like our veterans on the front lines. Whenever we're protecting our lands, along with our women, along with our LGBTQ2 plus relatives, everyone's been, you know, it's also important to understand that, you know, veterans have been assisting in those ways too, taking that knowledge to better our communities. But also, like, if you would like to reach out, engage with any of our speakers, please do. We'll be there'll be like an opportunity for that. But other than that, you know, that's pretty much it. I'll give like a final word or a final comment for any of our speakers, and we'll wrap it up. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Demetrius. I'll jump off and just say one, like, yeah, like Demetrius is in Scotland right now, and I just want to shout out our brother, Ramon Mejia. He's there as well, and I know he's holding down a lot of work of calling out militarization and climate change, and, you know, and so he's throwing down over there, and I want to shout him out and just acknowledge his work, in that he also is an Indigenous person who carries forward this message, and he's there, he's holding it down, doing work as well. So just want to acknowledge him and recognize him as well. But also I want to invite people, like if you're a veteran and like you don't agree with us, that's okay. Like I invite you to continue engaging in this conversation with us. I'm always open for people to reach out to me, especially veterans, and have this conversation and to like question me, ask me why I have this stance, go deeper. Like I'm here for it. I'm always like down to have that conversation. And like, we have to acknowledge that like, this doesn't always benefit us either. Like, why is it that we see ourselves in the very people that we get sent in, the very communities and countries that we get sent into, we recognize ourselves in them? Like, why is that? And like, why is it that we are able to do these things that we do and like keep ourselves safe in situations? Because we have ceremony and we have teachings that keep us safe when we go to war. When we go into these teachings, there's things there that don't have to be tied to the military. And like, I want to have those conversations. I want to decolonize the way that we're looking at being a warrior, and go back to our original instructions. Those teachings that we get directly from the land, those teachings that we get directly from ceremony, from our elders, and from all those, you know, that came before us. And so I just want to like say that as just like encourage folks to continue to reach out, continue to learn. You know, we'll drop a few links in the chat, but like The Militarization of Indian Country, written by Winona LaDuke, that was a truly formative book for me. And, you know, she gave it to me and she was like, Krystal, like, this is kind of rough, you know, on the military, but I think you're gonna like it. And there was no going back after I read that book, you know? And so I encourage folks to read that. We'll drop a few more links for About Face, Veterans Against War. Ksenia, Danny, Wendy, and myself, maybe Hermes too, if we can pull them in, are all members of About Face. You know, so definitely go check them out. And, you know, Dissenters is a young radical group that's also doing work. They're throwing down. So in terms of young people and folks that exist within the diaspora of impacted communities, you know, they're there. So definitely check that out. And then please read our paper, read our position paper. Demilitarization is decolonization. Have a read, like, let us know your thoughts, reach out, we'll have a conversation. Check.
I just want to mention Joseph Viles, who also went to the COP26 representing Indigenous voices. And also, water is not a trademark or an accessory. It's a necessity and giver of life.
Oh my goodness, so many things. Humbled and honored to be here among y'all. Yeah, I mean, I could go on for days on this topic. But I definitely want to shout out a seminal work that has been like just put everything into perspective for me. Is an Indigenous Peoples History of the United States by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz. Get it, read it, love it. It's beautiful. Nick Estes says our history is the future. They did a beautiful talk yesterday with Rebecca Nagel. That is just chef's kiss. Check it out. It's on Haymarket YouTube. Chef's kiss. Shout out to like folks throwing down on, I mean, everywhere. The front line is everywhere. And like, you know, Krystal and I have talked about this before where we're like, yo, like, unless you're throwing down and in their arena, I don't really want to hear the criticisms, right? And so like throw down. Praxis is the first principle. Action is the first principle. And I think all of us here have done that. But really, like, your tools are already in hand. No matter where you're standing, no matter what city you're in or what land you're on, your tools are already in hand. It's time to fight and it's time to throw down. And that's the call to action that I want to put out to folks today. So whether you are native to these lands or not, come correct, come humble, come ready to learn, come ready to be uncomfortable, right? And come prepared to be wrong, really. And so, you know, that really to me is like seminal in all of this work. And I want to tie it to like LANDBACK, right? If you're in a position to give land, you should be doing that. If you're in a position to give money, you should be doing that. To amplify the message, you should be fucking doing that, right? Pardon my French. I speak a lot of languages. And so, yeah, shout out for that. Just blessings to everybody and gratitude for everybody who put this together. And thank you. Check.
Wow. It's really an honor to be on this panel with you, all you fine people. A lot of things can goes hand in hand. It's one big ecosystem. Land back, you know, getting back who we are as a people goes to being human isn't a crime, you know. All of these things, just getting back our culture is a huge thing. And if we treat each other like our ancestors treated each other, we'll be successful. But we learn from history, and we'll learn not to trust the government again. You can't bribe us with a block of Gamad cheese anymore. But it's really been an honor. Awesome. Thank you for allowing me to sit with you all.
All right, y'all, and with that, that concludes this this live. Thank you all so much for coming, and we'll see y'all next time. Yeah, go on it.